Well, let's begin this afternoon with the crisis in the Eurozone. President Obama today meeting with members of the European Union here in Washington. The meeting comes at a time in which many see the Eurozone as being on life support after economic collapse seems to be spreading. Now, we've already seen Greece, Portugal, and Ireland bailed out, but now the Eurozone's third and fourth largest economies, Italy and Spain, are also under threat. Today's meeting is seen by some as a last-ditch attempt to save the Eurozone, with even some top experts predicting the Eurozone has just 10 days left to live if a major solution is not found by its next meeting on December 9th. Certainly whatever happens could have a global impact. World leaders are concerned, they're worried, some even pointing fingers. Here's Nigel Farage, co-president of the Europe for Freedom and Democracy group, expressing his anger at the situation.
You are all in denial. By any objective measure, the euro is a failure. And who is actually responsible? And who's in charge out of you lot? Well, of course, the answer is none of you, because none of you have been elected. None of you actually have any democratic legitimacy for the roles that you currently hold within this crisis.
Now, Nigel Farage has doubted the Eurozone from the beginning, but his view is one that even some original believers are starting to adopt, that the Eurozone just may be a failure. Let's go now to Joe Weisenthal, deputy editor for the Business Insider. Hey there, Joe. On one hand, this is a dire situation, but it seems that the only time things actually happen is when we are in dire situations. So I'm wondering what you think. Is this the end of the Eurozone as we know it?
You know, you're absolutely correct. I think it takes for a crisis to really get to the edge to spur people to act. I mean, this has been festering for at least 2 years. The first time we started talking about the Greek crisis was October 2009, actually, and here we are. But here's the problem. Because there are so many leaders in the Eurozone, 17 countries within the Euro itself and the more countries in the EU, even if everyone decides to act at the last second, there's no guarantee it happens because you have this tremendous problem of coordinating various national interests.
Good point. And I want to bring this up. There are some rumblings, I guess you could say, that the International Monetary Fund is in the process of coming up with a plan to step in and help out, at least with Italy. There is talk of a 600 billion euro assistance package, though the IMF is denying this. But I want to get your take on what you think would be some of the consequences of the IMF getting involved here.
Well, the first thing to realize is it's hard to believe that the IMF has that kind of money. Right now, the fund just is, it'd have to borrow money from the ECB in some kind of way if we're going to do anything like that. And right now, that's being denied. But I think the broader point is the last few days have seen a real flurry of rumors about, something big happening, whether it's the IMF or the ECB or some kind of stability pact or fiscal union or euro bonds. So something is cooking. You're just seeing too many headlines for there not to be something up, but we just can't figure it out.
I know.
The problem with just the IMF bailing out Italy is that even if it happened, it wouldn't solve the fundamental problem because the euro has a structural flaw. It's not just about the debt in these countries, but about the flawed aspects of all these countries sharing a currency. And unless the solution actually gets at the heart of that problem, nothing is going to work.
It is really interesting also to see IMF Chief Christine Lagarde in Latin America this week, not doing what the IMF usually does in Latin America, which is, imposing austerity measures. No, this time she's asking countries like Brazil, for example, for help. I'm wondering if this seems to me like a total role reversal, but do you think this is one of the strategies? You said the IMF doesn't have the money, the ECB probably doesn't. Is this what's going on here?
Well, I think actually that does seem to be, behind the scenes trying to get the BRICS to invest in Europe. But I think it's a scandal, and the reason is that fundamentally, the BRIC countries remain much poorer than European countries. Sure, on the surface they seem broke, but the problem is not enough money in Europe. The problem is a bad structure. The problem is the fact that the countries don't have control over their own currencies. The problem is that the ECB doesn't perform as much of a role as it could. So it's actually kind of outrageous to think of these poor countries bailing out these richer countries when what the Europe needs is not money, but structural reform to just make its own markets work.
I think that's such an interesting point. And also what you said earlier, when you have 17 countries, it's just not easy. Too many cooks in the kitchen, you could say. I want to talk now about Germany.
Sure.
Relatively speaking, Germany has a pretty healthy economy, low unemployment levels, and Angela Merkel, it seems, wants no part of one of the proposed solutions, which you mentioned before, for the ECB to essentially print more money. So what happens here? I mean, how much power does Germany actually have in all of this?
Well, in theory, so people say, well, the ECB isn't going to print money and bail out Europe unless the Germans sign off. Technically, look, the ECB is an independent organization, and it can do whatever it wants, and it doesn't need German approval. In fact, it might even be easier for Germany to resist kicking and screaming and sort of, let the ECB do what it may while also insisting that it never signed off on it. But the bottom line is that in the end, Germany, while it does have a relatively strong economy, it cannot afford to let everything collapse around it. Its own banks would get in trouble. Its European neighbors are major export markets. Those would shrivel up if they collapsed. Furthermore, Germany would lose its export competitiveness if countries left the euro and were able to devalue their currency. So Merkel is in kind of a box because she has opposed basically every feasible solution, the ECB, Eurobonds, and so on, but can't really afford to let the whole thing collapse. So it'll be interesting to see how she walks this tightrope.
Yeah, it certainly is interesting. And as we know, German Chancellor Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy have sort of been, teaming up in this effort, trying to take the lead in coming up with solutions. What do you think some of the solutions, both that you think would be good and also that you think we're going to see kind of put out on the table in the next few days?
I believe that the only solution that has a shot of working is if the ECB seriously steps up and becomes a lender of last resort to the various Eurozone countries. That is the fundamental difference between Europe and, say, the UK, US, and Japan, all of whom have central banks that serve as the lender of last resort to the governments or even the banks in those countries. Until Europe has that, nothing is going to fully convince markets that its bonds are safe again. Now, there may be some steps along the way, for example, perhaps a Eurobond scheme where various countries pool together and borrow money together, and then the ECB can perhaps buy up those bonds or something like that. It might, they might have to, do some tricks along the way. But fundamentally, until the ECB plays a much larger role in funding all of Europe, I don't think investors will feel very comfortable.
Well, it seems to me, Joe, that you're saying that there is still room for solutions. I know, though, the front cover of The Economist, the major story of The Economist this week in today's Financial Times, both mentions of a possibility that the Eurozone is done. Financial Times article today saying it could even be 10 days or less. I mean, this could be huge. Do you think?
Well,
do you think this could happen?
This is a real possibility. I think last week was seen as kind of a game changer because last week what we saw was yields actually start to rise in the core countries. On Wednesday, Germany had a very bad bond auction. And so that was the first time it looked as though investors were saying, okay, this isn't just a Greece or Italy or peripheral issue. This is an issue that strikes every country in Europe is potentially a credit risk now because none of them can print their own money. None of them have a lender of last resort to backstop them. So that kind of takes it to a new phase because at that point when everyone's at risk and you have this potential for a run on the entire continent, you really do have to get a solution right away. I guess you could say the fact that the ECB could still do this is an optimistic take. And, I don't think there are no solutions left. I think this is a possibility. But there are going to be tremendous cultural and bureaucratic hurdles to overcome for this to happen.
Certainly between the meetings today with President Obama and some of those EU leaders and also that December 9th meeting that's scheduled, certainly all eyes will be on the Eurozone. Business Insider Deputy Editor Joe Weisenthal.
Thank you.